I was 33 years old when I learned a painful truth about family. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most are the first ones to turn their backs on you. My name is Rachel, and a year ago, my entire world revolved around my 6-year-old son, Ethan. He was the kind of kid who could make strangers smile just by walking into a room. He had the brightest blue eyes, the loudest laugh, and a heart bigger than anyone I've ever known. Then one night, everything changed. It started with a fever. At first, I thought it was just a normal childhood illness, but within days, his condition became much worse. The fever wouldn't break, he could barely eat, and he was too weak to even get out of bed. I was terrified. As a single mother, I was already struggling to keep up with rent, bills, and everyday expenses. The medical tests started piling up, and every visit to the hospital felt like another weight crushing my chest. Before we continue, tell me in the comments which country you're watching from. Don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe for more emotional stories like this one. I worked extra shifts, sold some of my jewelry, and even emptied my small savings account. But it still wasn't enough. That's when I made the call I never thought I would have to make. My parents weren't poor. In fact, they were doing very well financially. They lived in a beautiful house just 40 minutes away. Growing up, they always told me that family comes first. So I called them. My hands were shaking as I explained Ethan's condition. "Mom, Dad, I need help," I said through tears. "The doctors need more tests. I can't cover all the costs alone." There was a long silence on the other end, the kind of silence that makes your stomach drop before the bad news even arrives. Then my father cleared his throat. What he said next would change the way I looked at my parents forever, and by the time that conversation ended, I would realize that Ethan and I were completely on our own. My father cleared his throat, and for a moment, I honestly believed he was about to tell me not to worry. I thought he would say, "How much do you need?" I thought my mother would jump in and ask how Ethan was doing. I thought they would act like grandparents. Instead, my father's voice turned cold. "Rachel, your financial problems are not our responsibility." I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. "What?" I whispered. "You heard me," he replied. "You made your own choices in life. You need to deal with the consequences." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I looked over at Ethan sleeping on the couch, his small body covered with a blanket, his face pale from exhaustion. "Dad, this isn't about me," I said. "It's about Ethan. He's sick." My mother finally spoke. "We're sorry, he's not feeling well, but we can't keep rescuing you every time life gets difficult." Rescuing me? I hadn't asked them for money in years. I worked hard. I paid my own bills. I raised my son alone after his father disappeared from our lives before Ethan was even born. This wasn't about irresponsibility. This was a medical emergency. I started crying, not because of the money, because I realized they genuinely didn't care. "Please," I begged. "I'm not asking for myself. I'm asking for your grandson." Another silence. Then my father delivered the sentence that still echoes in my head today. "If we help you now, you'll just come back asking for more later." And then he hung up. Just like that. No goodbye. No concern. No questions about Ethan. Nothing. I sat there staring at my phone for several minutes. Part of me kept expecting it to ring again. I thought maybe they would call back and apologize. Maybe they had spoken out to frustration. Maybe they would realize how cruel they had been. But the phone never rang. Not that night. Not the next day. Not the day after that. Meanwhile, Ethan's condition continued getting worse. The doctors ordered additional testing. Every new appointment brought another bill. Every bill brought another wave of panic. I barely slept. Some nights, I would sit beside Ethan's bed listening to him breathe because I was afraid of what might happen if I closed my eyes. Fear became my constant companion. I smiled in front of my son because I didn't want him to see how scared I was. But every time I walked into the bathroom, I broke down. I cried quietly where he couldn't hear me. One afternoon, after another hospital visit, I checked my bank account. The number staring back at me made my heart sink. I was almost out of money. Completely. For the first time in my life, I felt truly trapped. Then, something unexpected happened. A nurse named Linda noticed I was struggling. She had seen me sitting alone in waiting rooms for weeks, seen the exhaustion on my face, seen the fear I tried so hard to hide. One day, she sat beside me. "You don't have to tell me everything," she said gently, "but I can tell you're carrying this by yourself." That simple act of kindness nearly made me cry. Over the next few days, she helped connect me with local charities, medical assistance programs, and organizations that supported families with sick children. The process wasn't easy. There were forms, applications, interviews, paperwork, but little by little, doors started opening. Not because of my parents, not because of family, because complete strangers cared more than they did. And I'll never forget that. People who had never met Ethan donated money. Volunteers helped with transportation. Community groups offered support. The kindness of strangers kept us going when my own parents abandoned us. Months passed. Slowly, thankfully, Ethan began responding to treatment. The first time I saw him laughing again, I had to leave the room because I couldn't stop crying. For the first time in months, those tears were tears of relief. My little boy was getting better, and during all that time, my parents never called. Not once. No birthday card, no text message, no holiday greeting, no questions about Ethan's health. It was as if we no longer existed. That hurt more than I can explain. But eventually, something inside me changed. The pain became determination. The heartbreak became strength. I stopped waiting for them, stopped hoping they would become the people I needed them to be. I focused on my son. I focused on rebuilding our lives. And slowly, things started improving. What I didn't know then was that life was quietly setting the stage for something none of us saw coming. Because exactly 1 year after my parents abandoned us during the darkest moment of our lives, they would suddenly show up at my front door. And when I discovered why they had come back, I was absolutely stunned. A year after my parents abandoned us, life looked completely different. Not perfect, not easy, but different. Ethan was healthy again. The endless hospital visits had finally stopped. His energy had returned. His laugh filled our home once more. And every single day felt like a gift I would never take for granted again. As for me, I had changed too. The desperate, heartbroken woman who begged her parents for help was gone. The experience had forced me to become stronger than I ever imagined possible. I worked harder than ever, took online business courses at night, and eventually turned my small bookkeeping side job into a full-time financial consulting business for local small businesses. It started with 1 client, then 3, then 10. Within a year, I was earning more money than I had ever earned in my life. For the first time, I wasn't living paycheck to paycheck. For the first time, I could breathe. I moved Ethan and myself into a beautiful home in a quiet neighborhood with good schools and a large backyard. Nothing extravagant, just peaceful, safe. Ours. The funny thing was that none of it happened because my parents helped me. It happened because they didn't. Their rejection had forced me to stop depending on anyone except myself. And while the wound they left never fully healed, I had finally found peace. Or at least I thought I had. Then one Saturday afternoon, everything changed. I was in the kitchen helping Ethan decorate cupcakes when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I wiped frosting from my hands and walked toward the front door. The moment I looked through the window, my stomach tightened. Standing on my porch were my parents. For a second, I honestly thought I was imagining things. I hadn't seen them in over a year. No calls, no messages, no apologies. Nothing. And now they were standing at my door like old friends dropping by for a visit. My mother even had a smile on her face. I opened the door but didn't invite them inside. "What are you doing here?" I asked. The smile on my mother's face faltered. My father shifted awkwardly. "We were hoping to talk," he said. Talk. That word almost made me laugh. A year earlier, when my son was sick and I was begging for help, they hadn't wanted to talk. Now suddenly they did. I crossed my arms. About what? My parents exchanged a quick glance. It was the kind of glance people share when they're deciding who should tell the lie first. That's when I knew something wasn't right. My mother spoke. "We've missed you." I stared at her. Then I stared at my father. Neither of them could even maintain eye contact. That was my first clue. The second clue came a few minutes later. A black luxury SUV pulled into the driveway across the street. My father's eyes immediately followed it. Then he looked back at my house. Then my house again. Suddenly, pieces started falling into place. I had recently been featured in a local business magazine. One of my clients had nominated me for a regional small business award. The article included photos of my office, my home, and a story about how I built my company from nothing. The feature had received a surprising amount of attention. Friends shared it online. Clients shared it. The local newspaper picked up the story. For weeks, people had been congratulating me. And then it hit me. My parents hadn't come because they missed me. They came because they discovered I was successful. The realization made my blood boil. "You saw the article, didn't you?" I asked. Neither of them answered. That was answer enough. Finally, my father forced a smile. "We were proud of what you've accomplished." Proud. The word felt insulting. Where had that pride been when Ethan was lying in a hospital bed? Where had that pride been when I was crying myself to sleep every night? Where had that pride been when they ignored us for an entire year? I felt anger rising inside me, but I stayed calm. I wanted answers. Real answers. So I stepped aside and allowed them inside. We sat in the living room, the same room Ethan played in every day. The same room they had never bothered to visit before. For nearly 30 minutes, they made small talk. They asked about the house, the business, the neighborhood, my clients, my income. The questions kept coming, and every single question seemed strangely focused on money. Not Ethan, not my well-being. Money! Then the truth finally surfaced. My father cleared his throat, the exact same way he had done during that phone call a year earlier. Immediately, I knew something was coming. "Rachel," he began carefully, "your mother and I have been experiencing some financial difficulties." There it was, the real reason. Not love, not regret, not family, money. I sat silent. He continued. A business investment had failed. Retirement accounts had lost significant value. They had accumulated debt, more debt than they could manage, and now they needed help. My help. The irony was almost unbelievable. The two people who refused to help their sick grandson were now sitting in my living room, asking for financial assistance. My mother reached across the table. Families should support each other. I almost choked when she said it. Families should support each other. The very lesson they ignored when my child needed them most. For a moment, nobody spoke. The silence in the room felt heavy. Then Ethan ran downstairs carrying one of his toy airplanes. He stopped when he saw my parents. For a second, nobody moved. My mother smiled nervously. "Hello, sweetheart." Ethan looked confused. Then he looked at me. Quietly, he asked the question that changed everything. "Mom, who are they?" The room went completely silent. My mother's face turned pale. My father's expression collapsed. Because my son genuinely didn't recognize them. He had been so young when they disappeared. A year of complete absence had erased them from his memory. And in that heartbreaking moment, they were finally forced to face the consequences of their choices. Not through anger and not through revenge, but through reality. The grandparents who abandoned their grandson had become strangers to him. And as I watched the shock spread across their faces, I realized they were only beginning to understand what they had truly lost. What happened next would change our relationship forever. The room fell completely silent after Ethan asked his question. "Mom, who are they?" I watched my parents' faces change instantly. My mother's eyes filled with tears. My father's shoulders dropped. For the first time since they arrived, neither of them had an excuse. Neither of them had a speech prepared. Neither of them knew what to say, because the truth was standing right in front of them. Their grandson didn't even know who they were. A year earlier, they had chosen money over family. They had chosen comfort over compassion. And now they were experiencing the consequences. Not because I had planned some elaborate revenge. Not because I had poisoned Ethan against him. Simply because they disappeared. Children remember the people who show up, and they forget the people who don't. I gently pulled Ethan closer. "These are your grandparents," I told him softly. His eyebrows lifted in surprise. Oh, that was it. Just oh. No excitement. No emotional reunion. No running into their arms. Nothing. They were strangers, and I could see the pain on my parents' faces. But honestly, it wasn't even close to the pain I felt when my son was lying in a hospital bed and they refused to help. Ethan soon returned upstairs to play. The moment he left, my mother started crying. "I didn't realize," she whispered. I looked directly at her. "You didn't realize what?" "That it would be like this." I nodded slowly. "Neither did I." Another silence filled the room. This one felt heavier than before. Finally, my father spoke. "Rachel, we made mistakes." Mistakes. Such a small word for something that had caused so much damage. "You ignored us for an entire year," I replied. "We know. You never called." He lowered his eyes. "I know." "You never asked if Ethan survived." Neither of them answered, because there was no defense, no explanation, no justification, just guilt. And maybe for the first time, they were actually feeling it. My mother wiped away tears. "We were ashamed." I almost laughed. Ashamed enough not to call? She looked away. I could tell they wanted forgiveness. The problem was that forgiveness and trust are not the same thing. I had forgiven them months ago. Not for their sake, for mine. Carrying that anger forever would have destroyed me. But trusting them again? That was different. Trust is earned, and they had shattered it. Then my father finally asked the question I knew was coming. "Can you help us?" There it was. The real reason for the visit. The reason they had driven across town. The reason they suddenly remembered my address. Money! Again. I looked around the living room, at the home I built, at the life I rebuilt from the ground up, at everything I had created without them. Then I remembered the hospital bills, the sleepless nights, the fear, the tears, the phone call, the begging, the rejection. Every painful memory came rushing back. For a moment, I thought about saying no. Part of me wanted them to experience exactly what I experienced. Part of me wanted to watch them struggle. Part of me wanted revenge. Real revenge. But then I looked at them, and something surprising happened. I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt pity, because they had already punished themselves. They lost an entire year with their grandson. They missed birthdays, school events, holiday memories, family moments they could never get back. No amount of money could replace those things. No amount of regret could rewind time. They had already paid a price, a very heavy one. So I took a deep breath, and I made my decision. "I'm not giving you money." My mother's face fell. My father looked defeated. But before they could respond, I continued. "I'm not helping you because you're family." They looked confused. "I'm willing to help you find financial advisors, debt programs, and resources." I paused. The same way strangers helped me. Neither of them spoke. "You taught me an important lesson a year ago," I said. "When Ethan was sick, you told me my problems weren't your responsibility." My father looked ashamed. I continued. "And you are right about one thing. Adults have to face the consequences of their choices." The room became silent again. "But unlike you, I'm not leaving you completely alone." Tears rolled down my mother's face. For the first time, I think they understood. I wasn't being cruel. I wasn't being vindictive. I wasn't seeking revenge. I was setting boundaries, healthy boundaries, the kind I should have had years earlier. Over the following months, our relationship slowly changed. Not repaired. Changed. There is a difference. Trust wasn't magically restored. The past wasn't erased, but they started making an effort. Real effort. They attended Ethan's school events. They called regularly. They apologized without making excuses. And most importantly, they stopped expecting things from me. For the first time in our lives, they understood that relationships require investment, not entitlement. Would I ever completely forget what happened? No. Some wounds leave scars, but scars remind us how far we've come. Today, Ethan is thriving. My business continues to grow. Our home is filled with laughter instead of fear. And every time I look at my son, I'm reminded of the hardest year of my life. The year I learned who would stand beside me when everything fell apart. Ironically, it wasn't my parents. It was strangers. It was community. It was people who owed me nothing. And because of them, my son got the chance to grow up. As for my parents, they learned a lesson too. Family isn't something you can abandon when it's inconvenient and reclaim when you need help. Love requires presence. Loyalty requires action. And relationships require effort. A year after refusing to help their sick grandson, they knocked on my door expecting support. What they found instead was a woman they no longer controlled. A woman who survived without them. A woman who had finally learned her worth. And that, more than anything else, was my victory. If you enjoyed this story, tell us in the comments what you thought about it. Don't forget to like the video, share it with your friends and family, and subscribe to the channel for more emotional and powerful stories. We'd love to hear your thoughts and know which country you're watching from.